Hello. Thanks, Andrea, for the invitation. I am Sol Perez Martinez, Chilean architect and postdoctoral researcher at ETH Zurich. While doing my research about a British environmental movement that tried to democratize architecture and planning during the 70s and the 80s, the issue of who is allowed to write, to my surprise, became central. After reading hundreds of accounts of Europeans writing the histories of Latin American, I assumed that the process could be reversed, but as post-colonial scholar Neil Larson reflects, the gaze from Europe or North America towards Latin America has never required an apology. However, once its gaze is reversed, for Larson, it lacks this reciprocal authority due to the colonial relation. Larson's reflection helped me pin down an elusive and uncomfortable realization that my southern female gaze, for some, did not have the authority to write about their country. When I started my doctoral research, I ignored how my interviewees' perception of my cultural background would shape their stories. By the end, I had adapted my theoretical framework and my methods to navigate this complexity using decolonial feminism. While speaking English created a common ground fundamental for the interviews to happen, this did not eliminate the frictions of culture, class, and ethnicity. It is fundamental, I think, to confront and explore these frictions while coming together, to dismantle and challenge the ever present hierarchies within the commons. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Rafael Gendelmanales, a Chilean visual artist. I was part of the first cohort of the MA Situated Practice. My work mainly involves moving image, but I also work on projects related to archives, relationships, and memories. First of all, I would like to thank Andrea for inviting me. I think it is very important to create a network of Latin American practitioners in the UK and around the world. I also believe that the topic of this discussion is very important and connected to our region. I have always believed that one of the defining features of our identity in Latin America is the importance of the importance we place on human relations and the sense of community. Our history, identity, and culture have endured because of our bonds and common strength. Andrea invited me to present two very different projects briefly. The first is a project I completed 2 years ago relating to text and identity, and the second is an ongoing project residency that aims to critically reflect on colonial heritage in Europe. As someone of both Jewish and Palestinian heritage, I have been exploring both identities for some time. My first piece of work is related to my family history and is called We Study and Write Hebrew, which explores family archives. Specifically, I took my Jewish grandmother notebooks when she moved to Israel in the 70s, and I created a personal dictionary based on a selection of the words and phrases she wrote. In this artist book, I place a photographic archive next to each word or phrase in the dictionary. These images came from my father's photographs and the picture I took while living in Palestine, in the West Bank. The text enabled me to understand language as both a political tool and a means of understanding idiosyncrasy. The idea behind the project was to rethink these words through my own experience and to explore new ways of thinking about identity and history from a critical view, particularly with regard to the history of Palestine and Israel. The second project doesn't have a name yet, but let's call it a Ghost and Lost Explorer. It is a project that I'm developing for a program called Contested Desires, which is an ongoing 2 years program residency inviting different artists to work with colonial collections in Europe. I'm working with the Museum of Civilizations in Rome, specifically researching explorer journals of Italians. I'm focusing on two explorers, Father Gopi, who was a priest in the Brazilian Amazon, and Eduardo Vivanti, who went to Ethiopia. For this project, I'm creating a fictional explorer based on these references, as well as my own experiences on the program. I'm working with children to illustrate the story, and my plan is to create an animation based on these drawings. Alongside the animation, I'm also creating an artist book in the style of a journal for this fictional character. incorporating interwoven voices from the archives, my own voice, and the children's voice. I'm very interested in how children interpret these heavy topics and problems that adults cannot solve. I'm looking forward to taking part in the roundtable discussion at the end of the presentations. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Andrea, for the invitation to this roundtable, and to everyone in the room and online for being here with us. My name is Catalina Mejia Moreno. I am Colombian. I live in the UK, and my work is informed by the multiplicity of dialogues that these two contexts can foster, generate, and nurture. I teach at Spatial Practices in Central St. Martins, where I lead climate studies and run the Climate Forum, a research, curriculum, and knowledge exchange platform that brings the climate emergencies and biodiversity laws to the core of the program. In response to the title of this roundtable and to Andrea's invitation, I would like to start by emphasizing that in my practice and my work, I foreground Colombia, but to foreground Colombia is to foreground Latin America, and to foreground the Global South. This as a way of critically and ethically engaging with the South. To do so geographically and epistemically, it requires questioning practices, methodologies, forms of engagement, and a constant awareness of the relational and radical instability of the meaning, location, and history, as Ananya Roy has reminded us. This is a query that is present across my projects that involve situated and research projects and pedagogical and curriculum development. I would like to start sharing some historical facts to give context to my practice and to the conversation today. So I was born in the 1970s, a time where Eduardo Galeano, Uruguayan author, wrote Las Venas Abiertas de Latinoamérica, the open veins of Latin America, a critique of Latin American history that argues how the continent has been continuously exploited by the European and later US powers through extraction of raw materials, lands, knowledges, and bodies. Open veins, therefore, refers to Latin America as a body constantly drained of its wealth. Today, even if its veins remain terribly open, at least a few of those may be closing and undergoing repair, thanks to the efforts of numerous communities who have resisted erasure and re-acknowledged a wide range of ways of living rooted on egalitarian and ecologically sustainable worlds, but also affective worlds full of possibility. So beyond thinking of suturing the veins as an economic and environmental challenge only, it is an epistemic one, to which we all here, I believe, are committed, and it is in this world that my practice lives. So another fact, I studied architecture in Colombia in the 1990s through a mostly European and Anglo-Saxon canon. So here you see our references of architecture were rooted in ideas of progress as a linear process, on architecture as driven by individual master voices and narratives rather than a collective and collaborative project, and on ideas of international that flattened any nuance and situatedness. Of course, this involved a particular language, both formal and verbal, very much solution-driven and homogeneous, whose heritage we still live on today. Lastly, I arrived in the UK 17 years ago to do an MA in architectural history at the Bartlett, followed by a PhD in Newcastle University. I have traversed different academic and non-academic spaces. All this, plus being a mother, have made me even more so aware of the space I occupy, what my body and its intergenerational heritage brings with it to these spaces, and the need of making and nurturing connections and bridges between multiple worlds, lands, territories, and worldviews. With this context in mind, I will briefly touch upon Inga Kausai Aitaringa Inga Dwelling, a project. In light of the ongoing consolidation of the Inga Away University in the Colombian Andean Amazon, Inga Kausai is a multicultural and multilingual collaboration between Inga indigenous architects Musu Hakanamihoy, Pedro Jajoy, John Tisoy, Colombia architects and special practitioners Juliana Ramirez Onay, the Inga indigenous peoples of Colombia, and spatial practices students across BA and MA architecture. What started as a journey to study the Tamawasi that you see here in the photograph, which in architectural terms is misinterpreted as a building typology or Maloca only, but in Inga, a word that is a world, turned into a much deeper inquiry into forms of guardianship and honoring Inga livelihoods, as these are made manifest in space and also embodied in the Inga language, today as written Quechua dialect. How we did this? So firstly, in the territories we walked, as per ancestral practice, visiting tambos and lugares de vida. We held mingas de pensamiento y de palabra, collective sharing of words and thinking, led by elders, taitas, mamitas, amongst others. We felt and we listened, and we shared, in community and educational spaces within the Inga territories and beyond. Collectively, we realized that any effort on keeping these knowledges alive requires recording and sharing, both with the Inga community and beyond. So it was in these spaces where the idea of the book, whose layout you're seeing here, came out. As a book, it is a book that prioritizes the Inga language over the Spanish or English. Inga sits next to Spanish, and the English is an insert at the back, apart from where there are like glossaries, which is a page that you see here where the three languages are put in dialogue with one another. By doing so, it emphasizes Inga language as sacred and therefore deeply rooted in ancestral livelihoods. One that, as elders shared, speaks to pervivencia, which translates somehow into continuous living, rather than, and in contrast and really opposing, notions of survival or resilience as imposed to them by Western worldviews. It embraces a graphic language that is accessible, faithful to our experiences in the territories and to the Inga ways of living. And this is already a multicultural and pluricultural project in itself. It has been led by the authorial team in dialogue with Abby Vickers, a UK-based graphic designer at Central St. Martin's. As a project, it is a project that respects and honors our experiences in the territories, one that acknowledges its limits but embraces its significance as well. We see it as an open invitation for the Inga peoples to come together and continue weaving it, and an entry point for other peoples to recognize the knowledges held within. It is a project and a book that is a reawakening for the Inga as well as for us, as a recognition to continue expanding and asking ourselves about the significance and contemporaneity of ancestral livelihoods that can resonate with our own forms of dwelling, from everyday practices to ritualistic, the spaces we occupy and the ones that will come. Thank you.
Our starter culture is a practice of sowing, cultivating, and harvesting empathy. Our starter culture is a method I developed in 2021 during my time in situated practice to better understand the climate crisis through emphasizing empathy as a key factor in creating activism informed by the ethic of care. In other words, I looked at developing environments of empathy to create an inclusive environmental movement grounded in relationships. The work centers around someone sharing a remedy with me through a conversation. These conversations are what I define as sowing. They begin by considering what an individual can do when it comes to the climate crisis, which starts with me simply asking, "What makes you feel better?" It allows the participant to speak openly about times of hardship and recall their childhood and family traditions, leading to them describing a remedy, sparking a tender exchange. The remedies shared by participants are healing actions or rituals that they enact or embody. The concept of these remedies evokes a tactile form of storytelling that both the work's audience and I can learn from and participate in. These conversations create the work's foundation, creating environments that encourage healing, kindness, and caring. Following the conversations, I create a pouch compiling everything needed and enact the remedy myself. I define this as a cultivation of empathy. From here, I harvest. It's the process of accumulating the shared empathy that has been made through this conversation. The project aims to harness this creation of empathy and the common care we share, and use that to address the climate crisis with newfound relationships and ways of relating to each other. I embarked on many conversations of this nature. This is recounted in a zine format where the reader is allowed a moment of respite and goes through the journey of sowing, cultivating, and harvesting empathy, and to feel cared for so that they can begin to care for others. The zines are divided into chapters, mirroring the Libeles de Medicinalibus in Noriam Herbis, a Nahua herbal manuscript written in 1552 by Martín de la Cruz and Juan Badiano. All in all, our starter culture aims to question if by looking at the creation of empathy in relationships through acts of caring, can we begin to view small domestic remedies as revolutionary acts of healing ourselves? And how can we use this care to fight climate and social injustice? All to obtain the legal means to recover a right or to prevent or obtain redress for a wrong, or to remedy it. Most relevant to this conversation, however, is the foundation of this project, which is previously mentioned as the Libulos de Medicina Libes Indorium Eribis, first chosen as a medium to relink the remedies to past indigenous knowledge, but later, through the evolution of this project, I came to understand it as an ideal example of how knowledge is transformed through colonial powers. This herbal manuscript went unnoticed for centuries. It bounced around from collection to collection, and with that, an erasure of its original title and its authors. It was only returned to Mexico in 1990, more than 400 years later. Accessing the herbal, learning about it, and being able to find translations were quite difficult tasks. Having the ability to read a translated copy of the herbal at the British Library was a double-edged sword. I was thankful that I could finally read it, but I was also aware of the colonialist impositions on the herbal. How I had to have a reader pass to read the book, which required multiple forms of ID and proof of address. I could have viewed the herbal online, but I would have had to been fluent in Latin, the language it was originally published before being translated to English and then finally to Spanish in 1964. Even when visiting the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico to hopefully view the herbal behind a glass cabinet, I was told it was in storage and I needed to meet the director of the museum to obtain special permission to be able to view it, something I did not have the credentials for. The experience of connecting with the herbal brought up many questions we are here to discuss today. Thoughts I had after producing this work and the implications of my bringing it into a European context. There is undeniable European influence within the writing and drawing of the herbal, but what evidence can we see of the Nahua people keeping their identity within it? How do we do the same? How can we continue to apply our culture within our work without mystifying or othering even further? In using the work, did I increase its access, or did I continue to exploit it? Do I have the right to use it at all?
Hello all. Hey, hello everyone. I'm going to share my screen and get started. So hello everyone, and thank you, Andrea, for the generous invitation to be part of this panel. When I was asked to join this conversation, I felt genuinely excited by the opportunity to reflect collectively on what it means to study, practice, research, and imagine Latin America from afar collectively. This invitation opens important questions about intellectual distance and how we as Latin American practitioners and thinkers navigate the complexities of working across geographies and institutions. Drawing on Jane Rendell's concept of positionality and side writing, I approach this distance not as a limitation, but as a spatial practice, one that acknowledges our own positions, shape the way we interpret, write, and represent. For many of us working across borders, this position distance create the condition of what I understand as a form of commoning. American writer David Boiler describes commoning as a process of self-organization. In moments like this one, when we come together, we begin to imagine more equitable ways of sharing knowledge, ways that move beyond the rigid management structures towards dynamic community-based modes of governance. And it is here in a space like this in which I locate my research practice. Let me introduce Plantation Future, which is an experimental video installation that envisions the future of Louisiana's so-called plantation country. This work engaged with the intertwined legacies of slavery and ecological degradation in the lower Mississippi region in the United States, a region where the voice of the enslaved, their descendants, and even the land itself have long been silenced. The video challenges colonial narratives and instead proposes an alternative future, one that centers suppressed histories and recognizes non-human beings as vital forms of intelligence. Through a digital model, an eco-poem, viewers enter a world shaped by interspecies kinship and empathy, a world where restoration, both ecological and communal, becomes possible. The project works as a counter-archive using the erased landscapes of the Mississippi rivers as palimpsest, traced layered over time to explore ancestral knowledge and planetary futures. The combination of eco-poetry and archival research and digital media reimagines what a landscape archive can be. The poem becomes a collaborative medium for listening to water, to soil, to the archives, and to ourselves. It challenged the idea of a dominant narrative that has prevailed in the region for more than 4 centuries. The writing process of the poem itself became a reflective space, a space to explore what it means to write in common, to move away from the myth of the solitary author and toward practices of collective meaning making. As collaborative poetry shows us, this kind of practice gives rise to what poets Denis Duhamel and Maureen Seaton called this third voice, someone who is neither one author nor the other, but a shared voice, a communal utterance capable of imagining an alternative to plantation logics and colonial storytellings. So this poem was written in community with my project partner, Selina Ava, and in community with archive research, other authors that are referenced through the video. Now I would end by sharing a short moment of the video in which the poem reflects this third voice, this act of commoning, where the collective imagination begins to envision futures beyond the violent legacy of plantation. The video has no sound, it's just the 3D model and the text that appears. Let me share quickly here. Let's start here. So on the left side, you can see the timeline of the video. So it was a way to kind of locate the viewer in the process of where the poem is in relationship to the video. And every time we're referring some author archive or images that appear, we kind of gave them that reference through that timeline. So because of time, I'm going to just stop here. Thank you very much.
Every migratory flow between two countries entails a power dynamic. I am interested particularly in understanding how these power dynamics are embodied in space. This relation happens between many countries around the world, but I'm going to focus on one in particular, the one between Mexico and the US. So I'm going to start with this Mexican saying, Mexico is so far from God, yet so close to the United States. So that embodies the complex relation that we have with our neighbor country. I started studying this embodiment of migration in space in 2021, and in 2023 I wrote a book called Remittance Architecture, the Transformation of a Mexican Town. In order to talk a bit about this phenomena, I want to focus on Microhistory by Luis González y González, where you take very focused, very small phenomena in order to be able to explain larger phenomena. So here I'm talking about this small town called Vista Hermosa in the south of the state of Jalisco. What was interesting to me about Vista Hermosa is that between 1960 and 1980, its built environment transformed completely. So this was triggered by a couple of different factors. The society was very impoverished after the revolution, after the independence, and this was the perfect ground for the American dream to grow in. So These two factors together, they trigger these ongoing waves of immigration that started in the 60s but haven't stopped until today. So what I did during the research is that I started talking with many families that had some family member who migrated to the US. So by gathering these stories, I came to understand that people, they live with this set of aspirations that they try to achieve, and these aspirations are very much influenced by aspirations of the global north. I'm going to try to explain that with the theory of mimicry by Homi K. Bhabha. He's a post-colonial theorist, and he talks about how the colonized subject, it's always somehow trying to mimic the colonizer. So you can see in these pictures, on the left you have the White House, and on the right you have a mausoleum in Vista Hermosa. So the space becomes a great place to embody these mimicked aspirations and communicate them to the outer world. That happens through the introduction of new symbols, but also to the introduction of new ways to dwell. We're talking about new spaces because people are doing new activities and living differently in their houses. For instance, everybody has their own separate room, or they have some terraces to just relax, and a person that used to work in the countryside in Mexico, they did not have time to relax, or a built-in kitchen, whereas a Mexican kitchen used to be outside. There's these whole new ways of dwelling that are appearing. And there's also another phenomenon that I really like to point out. There are a lot of copied symbols, but there's also the ones that remain, the ones that they are not willing to give up on, using curtains as doors, or the different tools that are used in a kitchen. So they might have an indoors kitchen, but they're also going to have an outdoors kitchen. And in the end, the built environment becomes this reflection of the society. Like Norbert Elias analyzed in the Court Society, these remittance houses are reflecting the reality of a lot of people of the Mexican countryside. And what happens is that this architectural style is embodying a new transcultural, transborder identity. I did all of this research because I want to raise the question of where is all of the theory about this worldwide phenomenon. I had a very hard time finding different examples, and I had to go a lot in the field to actually be able to find the information that I needed. There's another theorist called Saralyn Lopez, and she does also these studies, but there is a clear lack. The second thing is that I also started this research because I heard a lot of architects that feel they have the aesthetical superiority to say that this kind of architecture is ugly. And I don't think it matters if one thinks it's ugly or not, but we need to be able to recognize the cultural value behind the remittance architecture and the fact that it's really reflecting the reality of millions of Mexicans. And then in the end, also in the same line, who is deciding which understanding of the global north aesthetics are worth studying? Because after all of these architects, they draw all of their references from the global north, same as the people who are building their remittance houses. But then which references and which aspirations from the global north are worthy and which aren't? So I just want to raise this couple of questions, and thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, I'm Jimena Urebe Rodriguez, a Mexican architect, and I'm here to present Narrative Geography of a City, a project based in Mexico City, which I have been developing for the last 10 years. It is a project that brings together architecture, literature, and the city in different ways, and I want to present 4 of the products that I have developed in this time. But first, as an introduction, I wanted to show to you the assignment I did for the site writing module when I was studying at the Bartlett, because I think it was the first approach to this project, even though I didn't know that at that time. What I tried to do then was to place the fictional space that I could find in a series of novels based in London in the real city. So I did a kind of book of maps where I placed each one of these places, and you could find them within the city. I'm not sure if the result was great for the assignment, but the idea of linking these disciplines stayed with me, and I came back to it some years later to start this bigger project. So the first thing I want to show to you is this map. It's a map from an area in the city called Coyoacán. It's in the south. And for this map, I worked with chronicles written by different people and in different times. And I compared the sites, the places in the chronicles with the real city to see how the city had changed. And I kind of wrote some responses to the chronicles, and I wrote a chronicle myself, using that as a starting point. And with this information, I decided to do a map to place these texts within the area. And the result is this piece. It's almost 5 meters long. And you can find the text, some images, and some walks that you can do to find these chronicles within the neighborhood. The second thing I want to show to you is this atlas. It's a series of 6 maps. Each one of them is drawn from a novel. So you can go to an area and find a specific novel within it. It has a suggested walk, and each map has some quotes of the novel. And I work with an editor and a designer, and we did this box, and each space in the box has one of the maps and also a little book that explains the project. After finishing this first volume, I realized I had only worked with male writers, so I decided to work in a second volume with female writers. It's the same system, the same box, but the content is different, and it is really interesting what happens when you compare the male perspective with the female one. And the next product I want to show to you is a book. It's an illustrated book, and I have been writing a lot in the last years, and what I tried to do was to use fiction, the writing of fiction, as a tool for the design process. So in these short stories, I wrote the story of different projects within Mexico City that I would like to exist. I imagine they could provoke a better urban life and things like that. So that's what the book is about. And I think the project has enriched my life in really different ways. It also shows how architecture, literature, and the city can work together, how literature can be a tool for the architectural practices. And it's also really interesting how the project has brought together different voices, different perspectives, different ways of exploring the city, living the city. And I think it shows how complex an urban life is, and it shows that if we bring more voices together, we will have a better understanding what a city is. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Andrea Isurieta. I describe myself as a transdisciplinary architect, integrating architecture with other creative forms through interconnected methods. Writing and research have become key ways I engage with geography, memory, and cultural identity. Rooted in collaboration and guided by feminist and decolonial thought, my practice reimagines space as a medium for connection, repair, and transformation. A central aspect of my artistic inquiry during situated practice was exploring the organic nature of language within specific contexts and geographies. I specifically delved into the nuances of language through spatial experiences. As part of my work, I developed Finglish, an artist's book that explores the relationship between language and territory, how space is represented through linguistic nuances as we experience it in everyday life. Language is a lens through which we understand the world. Gender bias in language not only shapes how we perceive ourselves and others, but how it is represented through space. Inspired by the figure of the flaneur as theorized by Walter Benjamin in the Arcades Project, La Dérive and Psychogeographies by Guy Debord, Janet's Cardiff, The Missing Voice, and motivated by Gloria Anzaldua's characterization of Spanish as a male discourse, my aim is to reflect on how I perceive and describe the built environment from a feminist perspective as a white Latina immigrant in London. The project seeks to bring gender awareness to non-gendered language speakers through an intersection of Spanish, my mother tongue, and English, my second language. When I moved from Mexico City to Bethnal Green in East London, I used to take the same routes in my daily commutes, rarely straying beyond them. Wandering without a specific destination felt unfamiliar, an activity that in my home city often carries risks. By recording my field experiences while walking through Bethnal Green, I develop a visual pattern based on color intensity to represent masculine, feminine, and neutral nouns and pronouns, a visual language intended to reflect how space is gendered through language. Though wandering may appear passive, recording my thoughts and observations as I walk transformed it into a research method. These voice recordings were made and transcribed in Spanish, then translated into English. Through translation, I explore how the grammatical gender used in Spanish, feminine, masculine, and neutral, affects my interpretation of public space, and how it shifts when expressed in English. This was a way for me to narrate urban space from a different positionality, offering a situated and gender-conscious reading of the city. As part of my major project, I participated in a one-year volunteer program at LAWA, Latin Americans Women Aid, a feminist nonprofit organization based in London. For many immigrants, particularly women, the experience of migration is marked by loneliness, intensified by factors such as gender, age, and ethnicity. In response to these challenges, LAWA created Growing Together, a group of older Latin American women who struggle with English but find community through shared experiences. I developed Just to Get Around, a collaborative project with these women that explores their experiences through the lens of the linguistic barriers they face while living in London. Language is inherently tied to geopolitical power structures that impose barriers, linguistic as well as physical, within the built environment. In the UK, linguistic barriers are not solely the result of language differences, but are also shaped by cultural and social dynamics. Latin Americans form one of the fastest growing communities in the UK, often arriving in search of opportunity, quality of life, or simply survival. London, renowned for its global diversity, is a multilingual city where various forms of English coexist and blend, creating what might be called a quilt language, layered, dynamic, and composed of many Englishes. As part of the process for this collaborative project, we gathered every 2 weeks to rediscover sites across London, learning basic English words to rename the landscape and explore the cultural implications of different lexical meanings in Spanish and in English. Language, as Sherry Simon argues, is shaped through acts of cultural hybridity, with translation becoming an active space of meaning-making. The project weaves narratives of cultural identity and nostalgia into site-specific audio guides, interlacing Spanish and English to reflect the internal negotiation of thoughts and self-expression across languages. These layered experiences serve as acts of cultural translation. This project aims to foreground the voices and footsteps of Latin American immigrant women, offering a feminist and decolonial lens through which to reimagine the city of London. It proposes an alternative way of mapping urban space through sound, lived experience, and the intersection of languages.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much, Andrea, for having me. My name is Castaña Arango, and I'm a situated practice alumna. I trained as an architect and currently work in strategic development for a Mexican architectural practice based in London. When Andrea reached out to me asking me to join this panel, I thought it would be valuable to share a project I started working on shortly after completing my master's. It's called Eje, a self-published journal that proposes a critical platform for architectural discourse in Mexico City, with a broader lens on territory, space, and culture in Latin America. The project began with 3 colleagues, all based in Mexico City. One from Colombia, one from Uruguay, and one from the UK. The reason I chose to speak about Eje is because it raises questions around language, translation, and knowledge, how it's produced, shared, and shaped by context. We created Eje because we felt that Mexico City was missing a space for critical conversation. There are cool places, great parties, and a really close-knit creative community, but we felt there was more to be done. More conversations to be had about how we approach the built and unbuilt environment and how we might reimagine this approach, to be different, to be better. I am going to touch on 2 topics that felt especially relevant to me. The first is on knowledge. Each issue is made up of a collection of essays, sound pieces, photo essays, interviews, and stories by spatial practitioners. We launch open calls, and we also extend direct invitations to contribute to the journal. At the beginning, we made a clear editorial choice, to publish only Latin American voices. We wanted to create a platform for voices that don't always get invited in. Then one day, we found out that one of the most respected researchers on Latin American cities is this brilliant woman from GSD at Harvard, Diane Davis. I was hesitant to include her. I didn't want to give space to someone from the US, someone who wasn't local, someone from a reputable and already well-published institution like Harvard. We had a lot of conversations about this. Should we include her? Why yes? Why not? In the end, we included her. But I was left with a strange feeling. I knew she was the best and that mattered to the journal. But that also started a long series of questions. Wasn't this journal supposed to be a space of resistance? How can we critique structures of knowledge while also engaging with them? And how do we reconcile expertise with positionality? I am still not sure I have the answers. The second topic I'm going to be talking about is on translating. With a journal, the obvious translation is the literal one of each piece. But I want to speak more about how the working relationship between my British colleague and me became its own act of cultural translation. I moved from Mexico to London and worked on the project remotely. He, my colleague, moved from London to Mexico and worked on the ground. And I find that dynamic really interesting. I left, or arrived, and then sort of returned. He left and stayed there. And sharing that journey, I think there's something special about it, because we were also translating ourselves. Sometimes we speak in English, sometimes we speak in Spanish. So who is translating who? I think there's another kind of journey there, of knowledge, of practice, of identity. And that just became an ongoing conversation. Moving forward, he pushed for an English edition of the journal, and I resisted. Much of the world's knowledge is already produced in English. Non-English speakers are expected to adapt. So why should we translate it back for English-speaking audiences? Long story short, we did a bilingual edition. Not as a compromise, but as a statement. Translation not just as access, but as reciprocity. And there is so much we could say about translation and sentiment. How translation is never an objective practice, and how there is always a piece of the translator in every translation. We never see the original, we see a practice. And to finish, going back to the idea of weaving webs, I think it really is about that. It's about understanding what webs are made of, what's already in them, what's charged within them, and how we might translate that practice to insert ourselves within them. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Julia. I'm a spatial practitioner from Sao Paulo, Brazil. I graduated in architecture and urbanism in December 2021, and in October 2023, I joined the MA situated practice because I was looking for a way in which I could expand my spatial practice beyond simply architectural design. So once the theme of this panel is centered in the dialogue between spatial practice in Latin America and the global north, I chose to bring for this presentation the two installations that were part of my major project for MASP. Just so I can give you some context behind the installations, I started developing this project thinking about space as a paradoxical concept, for it is an abstract concept that relies on a materiality in order to exist. So I went on applying this thought towards residual spaces, and I decided that I would act on the IOE building at UCL before I came back to São Paulo for the 3 months of summer break, which was in fact a very interesting choice because I ended up having the chance of making an installation during the time I was here as well and comparing it to the one I made in London afterwards. I am not going to be able to explain each of the pieces in details because it would take me too long, and this is a short introduction. But while I go through the photographs, I would like to talk about how I came to notice some major differences in people's relation towards space in these two completely different contexts. So coming from Brazil, I already knew that we have a really close connection towards spaces and especially public spaces. Because our climate here, I think, allows us to be outside for the most part of the year. And also because we have a great sense of community and gathering is really important for us. So we have many festivities throughout the year that happen in public open spaces. So I think that this way of occupying space makes us much more comfortable to be able to act on these spaces. When I moved to London, I immediately felt this big cultural difference, and it got even clearer to me during my stay and the more I developed my practice there. Because while developing this installation at the IOE, I got myself thinking many times about how this kind of work would be much easier if it was made in a country such as Brazil, in which we feel much less restricted in public spaces. We feel that we can take part on the dynamic of the city, of the public space. And from what I heard from some Latinos in Europe, we all kind of feel the same way. Of course, many things link Latin American countries, and most of these things come from this still very present colonial past. But when thinking about space and talking about spatial practice, maybe this is the most important one. And of course, I am the only Brazilian here to talk about that. But I would like to know what the other Latinos in this panel think about that, if they feel the same way. I cannot generalize and say that everyone in Latin America will feel the same way, but I think it's something so cultural, and it is, we don't notice it right away, maybe. And I would like to thank Andrea for organizing this talk. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Muitíssimo obrigada. Y muchas gracias.